Welcome to InSight. I'm Wendy Brokaw. Our topic today is problem gambling. What is problem gambling and how big of a problem is it here in Oregon? And more important, how do you know if you have one? So much is at stake for those who have become addicted to gambling. We get the facts from two experts in the field of problem gambling and its treatment and prevention. Would you please welcome my guests, Michael Keuler with Marion County Health and Human Services and John Ackley of Bridgeway Recovery Services. Thank you, gentlemen. John, let's get right down to it. What is problem gambling?
Problem gambling is just a set of behaviors that if I've been gambling and my gambling behaviors are starting to cause me consequences in my life, and I continue to gamble despite those consequences, it's developing into a problem in my life. It could be on a low degree, it could be a moderate degree, or even to a severe degree. But if I am experiencing, it could be financial or it could be otherwise, if I'm starting to experience those consequences and I continue to gamble, that's a problem in my life.
Why is problem gambling medically classified as an addiction?
Well, for a couple of different reasons. It in the DSM-5. It meets all the criteria, very similar to other substance use addictions, be it alcohol or other substances. People develop tolerance for it. People go through withdrawal from their gambling behaviors. So there's these indicators that we use either as substance abuse counselors or as gambling counselors to identify to what extent this behavior is becoming a problem in a person's life. And if I'm developing a tolerance, in other words, if I'm not satisfied with a given level of gambling and I need more and more of that behavior to satisfy the need within me, that's developing a tolerance, just like any other addiction. If when I stop that behavior, I go through some withdrawals, psychological or otherwise, that's just like any other addiction as well. So it meets the medical model for those.
Michael, how many Oregonians qualify as having a problem with gambling?
Yeah. So according to a study that was done by the Oregon Council on Problem Gambling in 2018, 83,800 Oregonians or Oregon adults are estimated to have a gambling disorder. That's about 2.6%. So if you put that into context, that's enough to fill the Moda Center where the Trailblazers play 4 times. If you also factor in how many people are showing signs of potentially developing a gambling disorder and showing signs of a problem, that's another 5.4% of Oregonians, which is about 175,000 people. So when you combine all of the people who are showing signs of a gambling disorder and could be classified as a disordered gambler or person with a gambling disorder, with those who are showing signs of a problem, you can fill Autzen Stadium where the Ducks play 5 times, right? So just to kind of provide some scope there, those estimates, if you combine them, 8% of Oregon adults are showing problem gambling behaviors along that continuum that John was mentioning.
Oh, what is the social and economic consequence of all of that?
Yeah, so that's really what we're obviously concerned with in regards to prevention. Within that same study, it's estimated that problem gambling costs Oregonians about $500 million a year in higher rates of bankruptcy, loss of relationships, criminal activity, loss of productivity in the workforce, and other mental health and addiction problems and the costs associated with that. On top of that, it is truly devastating in terms of what it can do to a family and to the person themselves. The relationship strain is definitely real. Family and loved ones could see that person change in a way that it does cause relationship problems or relationships to completely fall apart. Co-occurring addictions and disorders are common with any type of addiction. So if someone has a problem with gambling, oftentimes they have a problem with let's say alcohol, could be tobacco or something else. And experiencing mental health conditions is also another issue that we're concerned with as well. Someone who has a problem with gambling might also have a problem or might be dealing with, let's say, depression or some sort of other mental health condition. So it's not just the loss of money, it's also other types of health outcomes that we're concerned with too. And really, gambling is an activity that carries risk. Everyone should know that and should reflect on what, our specific gambling behaviors are, but also what our loved ones are as well. Okay. Even though there are risk factors, anyone can develop a problem with gambling.
Exactly. And that is my next question is, who is most likely to develop a problem gambling, and what are the risk factors?
Yeah. So people experiencing risk factors and lack of what we call protective factors. So factors that protect people against risky behaviors like alcohol addiction or problem gambling, let's say. Those could include, let's say, individual things, right? So how we're able to cope with stress in life, our self-esteem, could be, let's say, early use or abstinence, right? So if you start gambling regularly when you're younger, you might have a higher chance of developing a problem at that age or later in life. Same thing goes with other types of addictions too. Family is another one. So people with gambling in their families are 8 times more likely to develop a problem, according to a study that than those who don't have a problem. Okay. So family and the family structure that we have in our household is definitely a risk factor, as well as the genetic component too. Something we don't fully understand with the research that's out, but we do know it's a component.
John, do people with a problem gambling see themselves as even having a problem?
Not always. One of the things that I think Michael would agree with is we have a problem in the United States and the world in general with people acknowledging gambling as an addiction and as a problem behavior to the same level as they might recognize alcohol or drug use as a problem. So a lot of people aren't even aware that it can impact their lives, even as they might be experiencing those impacts. Because they're not looking at it through the addictive lens and seeing this is something that I can get addicted to. And so, no, I think a lot of people don't see it on par with other addictions. And I run up against that as a counselor as well, when people come in and say, can I even be addicted to this kind of thing? And then I kind of start trotting out some facts and asking them about what's happening in their lives. And all of a sudden, lots of times the light goes on and they go, oh my goodness, I didn't even know that was, realize that was happening to me.
It's wonderful that people can kind of self-assess whether they have a problem, but there are people who really do have a problem and don't seek treatment, don't even consider it. What then?
Well, I think a lot of people don't realize that there's help out there, that if we've got this prior problem that people aren't aware that there's an addiction, that this can actually be an addiction. I think it then goes to say that people aren't aware that there's then help for that addictive behavior as well. In the state of Oregon, on all gambling machines, there's always a banner 24/7 scrolling at the bottom of the screen saying, if you need help with your gambling behaviors, please dial 877-MY-LIMIT. That goes to an agency here in Oregon. It's manned 24/7 by gambling counselors. So if they dial that number, people will get somebody who understands what they're dealing with. This is what they do. But why they don't seek treatment, I think it goes along with they're not aware that it's a problem, that this can be a problem on par with alcoholism or any other addiction.
And there also might be in their minds a stigma attached to admitting they have a problem.
Yes, there is, particularly that can rear its head in certain cultures that have some very strong beliefs about luck and gambling within that culture. But just in general, we already know that there's a stigma around in our society around addiction itself. And if this is considered, and I think I've run across this a few times, if this is considered a light addiction, not as serious addiction or not as serious a problem, then there's that much greater stigma. I can't tell you how many people have come into my facility saying, I have a problem with gambling. And then when I try and tell my family about it, they say, well, why don't you just stop? Not understanding that it's an addiction on par with other addictions.
Oregon is a leader in problem gambling prevention and treatment, which is free. How is it funded?
Well, when way back, it's been funded in this means for over 30 years now. When they first started laying out how they were going to structure the funds received from gambling in the state of Oregon, a percentage of all the funds received from Oregon Lottery is set aside specifically for prevention and treatment in the state, basically acknowledging that we know for a certain portion of people that this was going to be a problem, and setting out the means and the ability to then address those problem behaviors with those people. And so anybody coming into treatment in the state of Oregon, be it for outpatient treatment or whatever, residential treatment, all their treatment is covered and governed and paid for under that.
Yeah. And so if people are gambling, then there will be funds for treatment and prevention.
Yes.
What is Oregon's approach to problem gambling?
Every single county in the state has a problem gambling counselor, if not a facility or organization, where a person can go and ask for help in that county. So it's funded throughout the state. There are certain counties that have multiple providers, but it's accessible. And when you call that 877 My Limit number, that number will then connect you, no matter where you are in the state, with the person closest to you in order to answer your questions and help you start to address your problem gambling behaviors. And so we have in the state, we have both outpatient, intensive outpatient, and residential level treatment available here in Oregon.
And Bridgeway Recovery Services offers both. Am I correct? How do you tailor your approach to treating problem gambling?
Well, when a person comes into treatment, they come in and say, hey, John, I need some help. I think I have a problem here. One of the very first things we're going to do is I'm going to sit down with this person for an interview, for an assessment, and say, okay, let's look at this and let's see what the extent of this problem is for you. Is it, going back to what I said before, is it low? Is it moderate? Is it very severe? And I'll look at, again, going at what Michael was saying before, protective factors. What are the challenges this person has in their life? What are the protective factors that this person might have in their life? What level of treatment is indicated by how much this is impacting their life at that given time? And take all that into account and decide at what level of treatment, be it that low-level outpatient treatment, is it the intensive outpatient treatment, or possibly they're meeting the criteria. They need that time out to get a break from their gambling behaviors and go into the residential level treatment for a period of time.
So what's key to their having success in your program, and how do you know when treatment can end?
That is a highly individual question, because each person, we don't have a cookie cutter approach that we apply to each person. Each person's different. I've had people who've been in treatment for years and years and years and finally complete treatment. I have people who've been in for just about a year and then complete treatment successfully, or even less. It just depends on all kinds of factors. We usually endorse somebody going and getting some kind of community support as well. There's such a thing as Gamblers Anonymous. And so people who are doing coming to treatment and going to community treatment, such as Gamblers Anonymous, or a community support group such as Gamblers Anonymous, those people, the more resources that somebody accesses, that can help their their treatment efforts. If somebody starts to use good coping skills, like we oftentimes talk about barriers to accessing their finances that they might gamble with, can we put some kind of barrier, not to prevent them from having their money, we would never do that in a million years, but can we slow down their access to the money so that they can pause and think, maybe I want to do something else other than gamble with this money. So there's a variety of behaviors, and the more different behaviors that somebody encompasses in their recovery, generally the more successful they'll be.
Can you give us an example of what you're talking about there, about something that you kind of self-administer to make sure that you don't have a temptation to gamble again? Do you have an example?
Let's see. Well, yes, actually, how about hobbies? Okay. The further a person gets into their gambling addiction at times, 9 times out of 10, we're seeing their hobbies, their pastimes, their passions fade out of their life because the gambling's overwhelming everything. So can we get them re-engaged with an old pastime, be it fishing, be it wood carving, whatever it is? I've got a couple of people on my caseload right now who are big into crafting, and getting them, unpacking all their crafting stuff from their back room and this, that, getting re-engaged in that. But what is it that you can be passionate about? Because if gambling is taken up so much of my life, and I take gambling out of my life, then I might have this big perceived hole within myself, and I need to fill it. Well, why not fill it with something that I'm passionate about or I consider fun and interests me?
What support do you give the families? They have to be part of that whole package, don't you think?
Well, yes, I couldn't concur more strongly. Families are when we can get family involved, that can be another huge indicator of a person's success. Oregon is very unique. We're one of only a handful of states, less than a handful of states, that actually provides support for what we call the significant other. It could be a partner, it could be a parent, it could be a child, over 18, of course. But I've had all those. I've even had a boss, an employer who came into me once and saying, I've got this employee, this person's gambling, and he's my best employee, and I don't want to lose him. What can I do to support this person? And so I thought it was a fabulous effort, but I've had wives come in, husbands come in, parents come in, children even, again, over 18, who've all come in saying, this person's gambling in our life. We don't know how to deal with this. What can we do? And they're entitled to exactly as much treatment in the state of Oregon as the gambler themselves are. So they can come in, talk about, yes, how frustrating this whole situation is, but also get tools, skills, and knowledge and insight in how to cope with this person's gambling behaviors, whether or not that gambler comes into treatment themselves. Okay, so how they can cope with it and keep themselves on an even keel, even while this person's behaviors might not be the healthiest.
Thank you, John. That was a rather amazing insight into the problem. And it also kind of plays well into preventions, people caring enough to want to get involved, and it's free for them too, to find out, well, what can I do to help? Michael, do you follow a broad statewide plan for preventing problem gambling with your services?
Yes. So just really quick to kind of tell the difference between treatment and prevention. Treatment is very important to try and catch those who are in the middle of their crisis when they need help. Prevention looks at it with a different lens of, there's an issue that exists. So how can we look upstream to see how can we prevent this from happening in the first place, right? So on our end, we have support and assistance from the Oregon Problem Gambling Services System, a connection of preventionists throughout the state, as well as with the state of Oregon and Oregon Health Authority. And we put together what are called strategic prevention plans, or a strategic prevention framework. We assess, what data and information that we know about, try and build capacity to support organizations that do the heavy lifting and bring people together to prevent problem gambling, build plans, and try and implement those plans through things like events and other awareness raising activities, and then also evaluate how sustainable we're being, how culturally responsive we're being. All of that wraps into what we're doing there. And recently we did what's called a community readiness assessment to see, what do people know about problem gambling? And for the most part, people don't really view it, like John had said, as an issue that's top of mind, right? So we're in this phase right now of trying to increase knowledge of problem gambling for everyone in our community, but also specifically to decrease problem gambling behaviors and the perception of harm among youth, starting early and looking upstream.
So what prevention services are available through Marion County Health with your services?
Yeah, so we offer technical assistance to educators, to businesses, parents, parent groups, and community groups. So that way they can get connected to the right resources that they're looking for. We also do guest speaking at events or in classrooms as well. Provide toolkits. We have a toolkit for businesses if they, let's say, want to have a problem gambling prevention policy. That's included in the toolkit. And we're also creating a toolkit for middle school classrooms as well that will be coming out next school year. And then we also try and do awareness campaigns. Again, we're kind of in that realm of we need to raise the level of consciousness within our community as a whole and the various pockets throughout our community, not just in English, but information in Spanish as well. And promoting youth engagement, right? Problem gambling isn't a silo. Oftentimes people who develop a problem with gambling have other types of risk factors that are part of their lives that, let's say, could cause other types of addictions. So what are those underlying root causes and how can we try and create a more resilient youth in our community to prevent problem gambling and other types of addictions?
So you're talking about young people early on getting a problem with problem gambling, sort of becoming at risk for us. How do you raise awareness with young people about problem gambling and how not to get a problem with it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what we do is we discuss the similarities to other addictions because oftentimes, or other problem behaviors, because oftentimes youth know what those other types of addictions are about, and really talk about the brain science, right? That if you develop a problem with, let's say, alcohol or tobacco, other than it being a substance you take into your body, it does affect your brain in very similar ways. You also see similar symptoms on top of that. So, if someone's using gambling to escape from a problem, that's similar with other types of addictions as well. We also provide statistics and information about gambling specifically. So that way we have a more informed group of youth, but also more informed community in general. Discuss what those risk factors are that could lead to problem gambling, like I'd mentioned before, and then also provide resources for people to seek help if they need it.
You're out and about in the community, both of you, talking to groups, engaging people. What do you find people are most curious about when it comes to problem gambling? Did they tell you?
Yeah, so people tend to ask or be surprised at what the scope is of problem gambling and also what it is in general. One thing that I've noticed when I tell people that I'm a problem gambling prevention specialist is I notice that they make comments about themselves. Right? They internalize it. They say, "Oh, I gamble, but I don't have a problem." Right? And that could definitely be true. However, after I hear statements like that, I say things like, "Well, it's just important, as with any type of activity that carries risk, that we need to kind of check in with ourselves and ask, constantly, is this developing into a problem? And should I kind of take a step back and establish a more responsible gambling guidelines for myself?"
One of the most serious facts about gambling that kind of can sometimes open folks' eyes is the fact that gambling of all the addictions out there, gambling has the highest incidence of people contemplating suicidal behaviors of any addiction out there, more than opiates, more than meth, more than alcohol, more than anything else. That tells us how serious this addiction can be. And sometimes when I tell folks that, it kind of takes them by surprise and yet opens their eyes that, wow, this is a real thing and it can literally destroy lives.
And they don't think that there's an alternative to it. That must shout out real desperation.
Yes, sometimes it does.
I'm looking at it from an economic standpoint right now. Gambling is a huge economic engine in America and right here in Oregon with many support. It supports many stable jobs. So with Oregon allowing sports betting back in 2019 and video-based gaming is a huge draw and revenue source, how do you keep problem gambling from worsening in Oregon?
Yeah. An important thing to really acknowledge is that gambling is here to stay, right? We know that it is going to be a part of our community moving forward. And so, you know, what can we do, right? That's an important thing to ask. And education is obviously one, trying to raise our level of consciousness about what problem gambling is. That gambling isn't necessarily the problem, but problem gambling is the problem itself, right? Just like with alcohol and drug use, there are risks if you develop a problem. So especially for youth with risk factors, you know, we want to try and prevent youth from gambling regularly because the statistics do tell us that they oftentimes do have other problem behaviors. Even if their gambling isn't a problem, just doing it regularly, we see issues, as well as suicidal ideation is higher among youth who gamble regularly. So really just making sure that people are more aware of that. Having a conversation with kids, just like with other types of addictions too, it's important to have conversations with use, right? And what that looks like, to seek help if you need it, right? And also for the loved ones and the gambler, not just the person who might have a problem with gambling. And kind of that underlying thing we've been talking about this entire time is to destigmatize people who develop a gambling problem or any other type of problem behavior, right? We all care about each other in our community, and to recognize that we want to try and help those who are in need, listen and trust that any conversation we have with someone is out of love, concern, and trust in general.
Yes.
John, your thoughts?
Well, you know, I guess just letting people know there are resources, okay? There are resources. Again, going back to that 877 my limit number. There's always somebody there. If you have a question about yourself, about somebody else, there's somebody who's on the other end of that line who can answer your questions. And these are people who've been doing this for years and years, lots of times. If anybody ever had a question, they could call Bridgeway. They could call their local resource, and just ask questions. And this is kind of going again what Michael's saying around reducing the stigma, being compassionate, but just ask questions without judgment and just fact find. You know, what's going on? How is this affecting you? The more curious we are and compassionate, the more information we get, and the more people feel like they might actually be able to talk to us rather than having to hide their behaviors. Just like any other addiction, people tend to hide their addictive behaviors because of the stigma, because of all different factors. And so if we're compassionate and open and asking questions, we're that much more likely to actually get some answers and for people to feel like they can talk to us about whatever's troubling them.
I think the remarkable thing is that it's free. Help is free for family,
Yes.
for friends, for people who have a problem or think they have a problem or want to avoid ever having a problem, and keep gambling in perspective and keep it social and fun and not let it become a problem. All that help is free. I think that's a remarkable step, and it makes me understand a little bit better why Oregon is a leader nationwide in problem gambling prevention. Gentlemen, thank you so much for this enlightening conversation. I learned a lot, and I'm sure our viewers did too.
Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us today on InSight. I'm Wendy Brokaw. We'll see you again.